My girlfriend whispered. I think I need to find myself. I smiled and said, then don't let me hold you back. I let her go gracefully, focused on building a better life, and weeks later she returned to a version of me she no longer recognized. I think I need to find myself. She said it in a whisper, like she was afraid the walls might hear it before she was ready to mean it. Her eyes weren't wet. Her voice wasn't shaking. She looked me dead in the eye and said those 7 words with the kind of calm that tells you a person has rehearsed this moment in the mirror more than once. I remember how my chest tightened, not in the way it does when you're blindsided, but in the way it does when something you've been dreading finally lands. Like the feeling right before a car accident. You can't stop it. You just brace. We were sitting at the kitchen table, and the overhead light was doing that thing it always did where it flickered once every few minutes. Just enough to be annoying, but never enough to justify actually fixing it. I had made pasta. There was a half-empty bottle of red wine between us. Normal Tuesday. Except it wasn't. She had come home quieter than usual that night. Put her bag down with this deliberate kind of slowness. Sat across from me instead of next to me. All small things. But I had trained myself, over 2 years, to notice the small things with her. So I already knew something was coming. I just didn't know the shape of it yet. What does that mean? I asked. Not defensively, just honestly. She looked down at her fork, pushed a piece of penne to the side of her plate, and said, I feel like I've been living someone else's life for a long time. I sat with that for a second. Someone else's or mine? She looked up. Both. And there it was. The sentence I hadn't known I was waiting for. The kind of honesty that hurts more than a lie ever could, because you can't argue with it. You can't tell a person they're wrong for feeling what they feel. You can only sit with it, right there at the kitchen table, while the light flickers overhead and the pasta goes cold. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. Her name was Nadia, 26 years old, graphic designer, loved black coffee and hated mornings, could parallel park better than anyone I'd ever met. Had this laugh that started quiet and then took over the whole room when it got going. We'd been together for 2 years and 3 months. I was 28. We lived together in a 1-bedroom apartment in a city that never fully quieted down, and for most of those 2 years, I genuinely thought we were building something real. Not in the vague, abstract way that young couples convince themselves they're moving towards something permanent. I mean, I thought about the long-term version of us constantly. The house, eventually. Whether we'd stay in the city or move somewhere slower. What she'd be like in another 5 years. I wasn't wrong to think all of that. I just didn't see that she had quietly started dismantling her side of it while I was busy planning the next chapter. She didn't use the word breakup that night. She said things like space and clarity and not fair to either of us. She said she felt like she'd been moving at a speed she didn't choose. She said she didn't know who she was outside of us. She said she was scared that she'd blink and be 40 and still not know. And I listened. Not with anger. Not with the desperate energy of a man trying to talk someone out of a decision they've already made. I just listened. Because somewhere in my gut, I knew that arguing with someone who's checked out is the loneliest thing in the world. You're fighting for a door that's already been closed from the other side. When she finished talking, the kitchen was very quiet. The flickering light did its thing. I poured a little more wine into my glass. And then I said, okay. She blinked. Okay. Yeah, I said. If you need to find yourself, then don't let me hold you back. She stared at me like I'd said something in a language she didn't speak. Like she'd prepared for a fight, and I'd handed her a white flag she didn't know what to do with. That's it, she asked. What else do you want me to say, Nadia? She opened her mouth, closed it, looked away. I thought you'd be more upset. I leaned back in my chair. I am, I said. But I'm not going to beg someone to stay who's already gone. She flinched just slightly, and I saw it, and I didn't take it back. Not because I wanted to wound her, but because it was true. And that was the end of Tuesday night. She didn't leave immediately. It took about a week of awkward cohabitation, sleeping on opposite edges of the bed, taking turns in the bathroom like strangers at a hostel, having polite conversations about whose turn it was to take out the recycling. The weirdest part wasn't the silence. The weirdest part was how normal some of it still felt. Like on Thursday, she laughed at something I said about a news clip playing on my laptop, and for about 4 seconds, it was just us again. Her laugh filling the room, me catching it like a reflex. Then she caught herself, and the wall came back up, and we both looked away from it at the same time, pretending neither of us had noticed. I started looking at apartments on Friday, not because I was supposed to, Not because either of us had officially made a decision about who was leaving and who was staying, but because I needed something to do with the feeling. You can only sit with grief for so long before it starts sitting on you. By the following Sunday, I had signed a lease on a studio across town. Nothing fancy. Exposed brick wall, big window that faced west, enough room for a bed and a desk and a second-hand couch that I found listed online, and talked the seller down by $40 through a 3-message negotiation I was unreasonably proud of. When I told Nadia, she looked almost hurt. Already, she said. You wanted space? I said. This is me giving you space. She didn't say anything after that. She just stood in the doorway of the bedroom holding a mug of tea she'd clearly forgotten about, and she watched me pull a bag out of the closet. I was out by the end of the week. The first night alone in that studio, I sat on the floor. The furniture hadn't arrived yet, eating takeout from the place around the corner, listening to the city outside the window. I had a fork in one hand and my phone in the other, and I was scrolling without seeing anything on the screen. And I waited to feel destroyed. I really did. I was ready for it. The wave of it. The 2 a.m. calls I'd have to stop myself from making. The hollow Sunday mornings. The looking at her side of the bed. But what came instead was quiet. Not the sad kind. Just quiet. Like a noise I'd been hearing for so long I'd forgotten it had suddenly stopped. The absence of the specific low-grade tension that had been living in our apartment for months without either of us naming it directly. I sat there on that floor for a long time. Just me and the takeout and the empty room and the west-facing window going dark. And then I thought, very clearly, okay, so this is where I am. Now what? I want to be honest here, because I think people skip over this part when they tell these kinds of stories. The first 2 weeks were not a montage. There was no dramatic transformation set to an uplifting soundtrack. I went to work. I came home. I cooked bad meals. I'd let Nadia handle most of the cooking over the years, which I hadn't fully registered until I was standing in a strange kitchen, apparently unable to make rice without burning it. I called my brother once and said I was fine and meant about 60% of it. We used to watch something together at 9 p.m. Didn't even matter what. Some documentary she'd half-picked. Some show I'd been meaning to finish. Sometimes just whatever was on while one of us fell asleep first. It was the ritual of it. The being next to someone of it. The weight of another person on the couch beside you that you stop noticing until it's gone. And at 9 p.m. in that studio apartment, I would feel the absence of that like a small bruise you keep accidentally pressing. But I didn't call her. And I didn't text her. Not once. Not because I was playing a game. Not because I was following some 12-step strategy I'd found online about how to make your ex miss you by pretending you don't care. But because I'd made a decision in that kitchen on a Tuesday night. I had said, don't let me hold you back, and I had meant it. And I had enough self-respect to actually stand behind it. Words are only as real as the behavior that follows them. Somewhere around week 3, something shifted. I got up early on a Saturday morning. Not because I had to, just because I was awake and the light through that west-facing window was doing something quietly beautiful, even though it was technically a sunrise and the window faced the wrong direction for it. And I went for a run. I hadn't run in probably 8 months. Before Nadia and I started living together, I'd been fairly consistent about it. Then cohabitation came with its routines, and the routines were comfortable. And comfort has a way of quietly crowding out the things you used to do for yourself. Not with malice, just with gravity. I was slow that first Saturday. My knees complained for the first 2 blocks like they were filing a formal grievance. My lungs staged what I can only describe as a structured protest. But I ran for 40 minutes, came back sweating and breathing like I'd just survived something, and stood in my kitchen drinking water and feeling, for the first time in weeks, like I was actually in my own body. Not hovering above it. Not just getting through the day. Actually in it. Present to it. Aware of it. I went again the next morning. And the morning after that. By the end of the first month, I was running 5 days a week. The knees stopped complaining. The lungs forgave me. Not for anyone. Not for revenge. Not for some imagined future moment where Nadia would see me and realize what she'd walked away from. I want to be specific about that, because the glow-up for revenge story is a tempting frame, and it's mostly a lie. I ran because of how it made me feel while I was actually running. Because it was the 1 hour of the day when I was completely unavailable to anything except the road and my own breathing and the sound of the city waking up. For the first time in a long time, I was doing something purely because of the sensation of doing it. And it felt like something I'd been quietly starving for without knowing I was hungry. My friend Cole noticed before I did. We grabbed lunch around week 5 at a sandwich place near his office. He looked at me across the table halfway through eating and said, "You seem different." "Different how?" I asked. "Less heavy," he said. "Like something fell off you." I thought about that. "Maybe something did," I said. He tilted his head, studying me the way he does when he's not sure if something is good news or worrying news and doesn't want to call it wrong. "Are you actually okay? Or are you doing that thing where you convince yourself you're fine and then fall apart in month 3? "I'm not doing that thing," I said. "How would you know?" "Because month 3 is now," I said. "And I'm not falling apart." He seemed to consider that. "Are you happy?" he asked. Genuinely. Genuinely. "Yeah," I said. "I think I actually am." And the strange part was that I wasn't performing it. I wasn't saying it for his benefit or for mine or because it was the thing you were supposed to say. I was saying it because it was accurate. That's the thing about grief when you let it run its course instead of swimming circles in it. It doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. It becomes smaller and more portable. You can carry it without losing your posture. I should tell you about the work thing, because that was actually the bigger shift when I look back at everything. I'd been working at the same company for 3 years. Decent job, decent pay, the kind of work you describe to people at parties with visible lack of enthusiasm, and then quickly pivot away from by asking about their lives instead. Not bad work, just not mine. I'd taken it because it paid well, and I was 25 and the path of least resistance felt like a reasonable philosophy at 25. During the 2 years with Nadia, I'd gotten comfortable. We were building a life together, or I thought we were, and somewhere along the way I had confused stability with settling. I had stopped asking myself what I actually wanted to be doing. Not because Nadia was holding me back. She never did that. If anything, she'd push me more than once, mentioned opportunities one should pursue, sat with me through the late nights when I talked about the things I actually cared about building. But I had a particular way of pouring everything into the relationship that left very little capacity for anything else. I was the one who made the plans, the reservations, the trips, the anniversary surprises. The one who remembered her parents' birthdays and her best friend's boyfriend's name and the name of the childhood dog she'd had for 2 years before losing it. I was the one who noticed when she was stressed before she said she was stressed, who cleared his schedule when she had a hard week, who coordinated everything around our shared life like a personal project manager who had forgotten to put himself on the calendar. I gave the relationship everything I had, and somewhere in the process, I had stopped giving myself anything. Not dramatically, not all at once, just gradually, like a room where the furniture keeps getting rearranged until you can't remember where anything used to be. About 3 weeks after moving out, I dug out a half-finished business proposal I'd written the year before. It was a service concept I'd been developing on the side. I won't get into all the specifics, but it was something I genuinely believed in. Something I'd stayed up too late thinking about more than once. Something I'd mentioned to Nadia about 4 months before that Tuesday, and she'd said, "That's a great idea," in the particular tone that means that's a great idea for someone else, but not for us right now. The proposal had been sitting in a folder on my desktop labeled Someday. I opened it at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday, expecting to just skim it and close it. I didn't close it until 3 a.m. I rewrote the whole thing, not frantically, not in the way you work when you're trying to outrun a feeling, but with the particular kind of calm focus that comes when the noise is finally gone and the channel is clear. I spent the next 2 weeks refining it, reaching out to 2 people in my professional network I'd been meaning to contact for months, and putting together a pitch I genuinely believed in for the first time in years. The first meeting didn't go anywhere. The second meeting lasted 2.5 hours and ended with the other person saying, "Let me think about this, and I'll call you next week." He called on Thursday. Within 6 weeks, I had 2 serious meetings locked in. By week 8, I had a verbal agreement on a contract. Not a small one. One that would take me from decent job, decent pay, to actually building something of my own. A thing with my name on it in the way that actually matters. I remember the night I got the email confirming it. I sat at my desk and looked at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the laptop. Then opened it again and read the email once more to make sure I'd read it right. Then I went for an evening run. Nobody to celebrate with in the immediate moment. Cole texted me a string of fire emojis when I told him. My brother called and said, "I always knew you had this in you," in the slightly emotional voice that embarrassed both of us, and neither of us acknowledged. It wasn't a party. Wasn't a dramatic scene. Just a man, alone in a studio apartment, closing a laptop and feeling something he had forgotten he was allowed to feel. Pride. Clean, uncomplicated, doesn't need anyone else in the room pride. The kind that comes entirely from the inside. I want to be clear about something that I think gets lost in these stories. During all of this, I didn't hate Nadia. I didn't spend my evenings constructing a villain out of her. I didn't go over every argument we'd ever had and retroactively assign blame. I didn't turn her into a cautionary tale to tell at bars or a character in a story designed to make me look better. That kind of thing is a waste of time that masquerades as processing. I understood her. In an uncomfortable way, I even respected the honesty of what she'd done. Because the alternative is what a lot of people do. They stay. They stay and they slowly hollow out from the inside. They stay and they become resentful and distant and begin quietly punishing the other person for a cage they helped build. They stay and they have 1,000 small moments of cruelty dressed up as ordinary life until nobody remembers what the original problem was. She didn't do that. She sat down at a kitchen table and told me the truth while the pasta was still warm. It hurt. It cost me something I had genuinely valued. But it was honest. And I would rather be handed a clear loss than spend years inside a slow and quiet bleed that nobody ever names out loud. But here's where it gets complicated. Because about 7 weeks after I moved out, she texted me. Just, "Hey, how are you?" 3 words. The most loaded 3 words in the English language when they come from a person who left. I looked at that message for a long time, sitting at my desk with the contract work open in front of me and the evening light coming through the west window at that particular angle. I typed several responses and deleted all of them. Then I put my phone face down on the desk and went back to what I was doing. I answered 2 hours later. Good. Busy. Hope you're well. Polite. Warm enough not to be weaponized. Cold enough to communicate that I wasn't sitting around waiting. She replied almost immediately. Can we maybe grab coffee sometime? Just to talk. I read it. Sat with it. Understood exactly what it was and what it probably wasn't. And I wrote back. Maybe. I'll let you know when things settle down on my end. Which was true. Things were genuinely hectic with the contract. But it was also a kind of answer. Because the version of me that would have rearranged everything to see her the moment she expressed any interest was no longer the version typing back. I should tell you about the party before we get to the coffee. Cole had a birthday thing at his place. Not a huge gathering. Maybe 20 people. The kind of easy Saturday evening where you end up standing in someone's kitchen talking for 3 hours without ever planning to. I hadn't been very social in the weeks after the breakup. Not in a sad, retreating from the world way. I was just focused. Deliberately focused in a way that felt new and worth protecting. But I went to this one. And there was a woman there. A friend of Cole's girlfriend, visiting from out of town for the week. Her name was Petra. She had this way of listening to you that made you feel like whatever you were saying was actually worth hearing. Not the performative kind of listening where someone nods at the right intervals and waits for their turn to speak. The real kind. The kind where they catch the specific detail you almost glossed over and ask about it specifically. We talked for probably 2 hours standing in that kitchen. About cities. About the strange grief of leaving jobs you never really loved. About the particular loneliness of being competent at something that doesn't feel like yours. She was smart in a way that challenged you rather than performed at you. There's a difference, and it isn't always obvious until someone asks you a question that takes you a full minute to answer honestly. I drove home at midnight thinking about that conversation. Not about her, specifically, in the obvious romantic comedy way. About the fact that I just talked to someone for 2 hours and left feeling more energized than when I'd arrived. That was not a feeling I could remember having at a social event in a long time. Not with Nadia, not with anyone really. And I didn't feel guilty about noticing it. I just noted it the way you note something that tells you something true about yourself. Petra and I exchanged numbers before she went back out of town. Nothing happened immediately. We texted occasionally, then called once, long enough that I looked up and it was past midnight and I genuinely hadn't noticed the time going. Then called more often. The kind of thing that builds slowly and without anyone explicitly deciding it's building. I told Cole about it around week 9. He grinned at me over his coffee cup with the expression of a man who has been vindicated. Look at you, he said. Don't, I said. I'm just saying, he said. 8 weeks ago you were eating takeout on a bare floor, and now you've got a contract and you're talking about this woman like a teenager. I don't talk about her like a teenager. You used the phrase, effortlessly interesting. That's a normal thing to say about a person. Out loud. Unprompted. To me, with that face. I tried not to smile. I did anyway. Okay, I said. Maybe a little like a teenager. He pointed at me. There it is, he said. It was around week 10 that Nadia called me. Not texted. Called. I was in the middle of something at my desk when her name appeared on my screen and I stared at it through a full ring before answering. What I felt was not the desperate ache I might have expected 8 weeks earlier. Not the hollow pull. More like a low, steady hum. Recognition. The feeling of a book you've read and set down on a shelf. "Hey," I said. "Hey." Her voice was different. Smaller somehow. Less like the version I'd known for 2 years, and more like the version of her that existed before we'd been away. "I know I should have called sooner," she said. It's been a weird few weeks." "Okay," I said. Not inviting. Not cold. Just neutral. She paused. "How are you?" And I mean actually, not just the polite version. I thought about it honestly. "Good," I said. "Actually good." Another pause, longer this time. "You sound different." "Different how?" She took a second. "More settled," she said. "Like you've put something down." "I have," I said. "That's good," she said quietly. And she meant it. I could hear that she genuinely meant it. But I could also hear the thing underneath it. The slight thinness. The question she hadn't asked yet. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. Surface things. Her job, my contract, mutual news passed through mutual people. At the end she said, "I'd really like to see you." "Yeah," I said. Not to be weird. Just, I miss you. As a person. As someone I knew really well. "I get that," I said. "Is it okay to say that?" "It's honest," I said. "I appreciate honest." "So maybe coffee," she said. "Just coffee." "Sure," I said. "Give me a couple weeks. Things are hectic right now. I'll reach out." And I hung up. Cole told me I was being cold. I told him I was being honest. "There's a difference between being honest and being pointedly measured," he said. "Maybe," I said. "But I'm not performing anything. I genuinely don't have room right now." She sounded like she regretted it, he said. "Probably," I said. "And that doesn't mean what, Cole?" He looked at me carefully. "Change anything for you?" I thought about that for a moment before I answered. Because it deserved a real answer. "It changes how I think about what we had," I said. "It reframes some things. Closes some open questions that were just sitting there. But it doesn't change anything about where I'm going." Cole nodded slowly. "You don't want her back," he said. "It wasn't really a question. I want the version of her from 18 months ago back," I said. "But that version and I would probably end up here anyway." We were already starting to diverge. We just didn't say it out loud. He was quiet. "And Petra?" he asked. "Petra is a separate thing," I said. "Not a replacement. Not a rebound. Just a separate, actual thing." He nodded again. Looked at his coffee. "When did you get like this?" he said. "I told you," I said. She gave me the time. "I want to talk about something that nobody really prepares you for. When you go through a breakup and you come out the other side not just intact, but genuinely better. When the transformation isn't a performance, but an actual internal shift in how you move through the world. People react in ways that are sometimes harder to navigate than the grief itself. Your friends are happy for you mostly, but there's this slight disorientation. Like they had a script for how this was supposed to go, and you've gone off book entirely. The sad weeks, the rebound attempt, the slow, painful climb back to something resembling baseline. That's the script. And when you skip half of it and land somewhere they didn't anticipate, they don't quite know where to put you. My brother called me around week 11 and said, "You're not still just pretending to be fine, right?" "No," I said. "Because it's okay if you are," he said. "You don't have to be the guy who handled it perfectly." "I'm not the guy who handled it perfectly," I said. "I'm the guy who handled it. There's a difference." He was quiet for a second. "I liked her," he said. "I want you to know that. I thought she was good for you." "She was good to me," I said. "That's not the same thing." He took a moment with that. "Are you sure about that distinction?" he said. "No," I said honestly. "But I think about the last 6 months of us, and I don't miss what we were. I miss what we used to be. And you can't go back to that. You can only go forward to something different." He said, "I'm proud of you." I said, "Don't make it weird." He laughed. I laughed. And for a second, it was just the two of us on the phone the way we used to be when we were younger and things were simpler, and neither of us had been through enough yet to know what any of this meant. We had coffee on a Thursday. Week 12. I picked a place I'd discovered after moving out. Small, good espresso, far enough from our old neighborhood that nothing would be loaded with the weight of memory. She was already there when I arrived, sitting with both hands around a mug, looking out the window. She looked up when the door opened, and I watched her face do something involuntary. A flicker, not of sadness exactly, of something more complicated and harder to name. Like a person who has walked back into a room expecting to find it unchanged and discovering the furniture has been rearranged. "Hey," she said. "Hey." I sat down. I had not prepared for this in the way I might have prepared 3 months ago. Wasn't managing myself. Wasn't monitoring my facial expressions. Wasn't running contingency plans in the back of my mind. I just sat down like a person having coffee with a person, and I watched her try to calibrate. She kept looking at me in this particular way, like she was holding a photograph next to the real thing and finding the measurements slightly off. "You look good," she finally said. "Thanks. I mean actually different, not just." "You said that on the phone too," I said. "I know, but in person it's more." She stopped. "More what?" She studied me for a second. "You're not trying," she said. "To do what?" "To be anything," she said. "You used to try." Not in a bad way, but there was always this energy of managing things, making sure everything was okay, making sure I was okay. And now you just seem like you walked in to get a coffee, and I happened to be here. I didn't say anything. She shook her head slightly. "I don't mean that badly," she said. "It's actually kind of striking. How have you been?" I asked. She laughed a little. "Deflecting," she said. "Giving you the floor," I said. She wrapped her hands tighter around the mug. "Honestly, it hasn't been what I expected." "What did you expect?" "More clarity," she said. "More of a sense of landing somewhere solid." "Did you land anywhere?" She thought about it. "I landed back at the beginning," she said. "Which maybe is exactly where I needed to go. I just didn't think it would feel so small when I got there." I listened. She kept going. She told me things that afternoon that I think she'd been holding for weeks. That the space she'd wanted had felt good for about the first 2 weeks. That she'd gone out a lot, seen friends she'd let drift, tried things she'd been putting off, stayed up late with a kind of freedom she'd told herself she was missing. That for a moment it had genuinely felt like freedom. And then, gradually, the novelty had peeled back. And underneath it was just her apartment. Just her. On a Sunday evening, not quite knowing what she'd been looking for, or whether she'd found it, or whether the looking itself had been the whole point all along. "I thought finding yourself would feel more like arriving somewhere," she said. "Like stepping into a room that finally fits. But it mostly felt like wandering the hallway." I nodded. She looked at me. "Can I tell you something that's going to sound terrible?" she said. "Yeah," I said. "I kept thinking about this thing you used to do," she said. "You'd make coffee on Sunday mornings, and you'd stand at the window while it brewed. Just stand there looking out at the street. Not on your phone. Not doing anything. Just looking." She paused. "You looked so content," she said. "Not happy. Not performing anything. Just content. That specific, quiet thing." "Okay," I said quietly. "I kept trying to feel that," she said. "That specific one. And I couldn't find it anywhere. Not once. And somewhere around week 6 I realized that I don't think it's a feeling you find by yourself." She looked at me directly. "I think I was an idiot," she said. "I think I made a mistake." I sat with that for a long time. Not triumphant. Not wounded. Just very present. "I don't think you were an idiot," I said. "I think you needed to check." "I cost us 2 years," she said. "You didn't cost us 2 years," I said. "The 2 years were real. They happened. Whatever this is now doesn't change that they happened." She had tears in her eyes. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet kind you fight to keep still. "Do you think there's any chance?" she started. "Nadia," I said. She stopped. She looked at me, and I think she could already read the answer in how I said her name. Not with anger. Not with coldness. With a gentle finality that I hadn't planned, but that came out naturally and honestly. There's a version of this story where I take her back, where the coffee shop and her honesty and the memory of 2 years and the specific way her laugh used to take over a room all gather into a feeling that overrides everything else. And I understand that version. I genuinely do. Because I still cared about her. That part didn't disappear just because I'd spent 12 weeks building a life around its absence. You don't love someone for 2 years and flip a switch. You carry it differently. But caring about someone and choosing to rebuild a life with them are not the same thing. And I had spent 12 weeks learning what it felt like to build something entirely for myself. Not for us. Not for the concept of us. Not in service of anyone else's comfort or peace. And the man sitting in that coffee shop had requirements the man at that kitchen table had never even thought to articulate. Requirements like, I want to be chosen, not returned to. Requirements like, I want someone who knows themselves well enough not to need to disappear in order to look. Requirements like, I want to be with someone who wants the forward version of me, not a return to the comfortable one. I think you should keep looking, I said. Not because you did something unforgivable. Not because I'm punishing you. But because what you were looking for when you left, I don't think you've actually found it yet. She looked at the table. And us? She asked. I think we were real, I said. And I think we're done. She sat with that. A tear made it past her guard. She caught it quickly. I came back and you'd already gone somewhere else, she said. You told me not to wait, I said. I didn't actually say that. You said don't let me hold you back, I said. I took that as permission to move forward. She closed her eyes briefly. What are you moving toward, she asked. I thought about Petra, about the Sunday runs, about the contract on my desk, about the exposed brick wall and the big west-facing window, and how I made coffee now and stood in front of it while it brewed and felt, genuinely felt, like myself. Like the specific version of myself that existed when nobody else's needs were louder than my own. I'm not entirely sure yet, I said, but I'm moving, and that feels like enough for right now. She cried in the parking lot after. Not loudly, not the way people cry in movies. The quiet, controlled kind that happens when you've held it together through the conversation, and now you're outside, and there's nobody left to hold it in for. I walked her to her car because it was the right thing to do. Not because I owed her. Not because I was performing anything. Just because she was a person I'd loved and she was sad in a parking lot, and I wasn't cold. She hugged me and held on a second longer than a casual goodbye. And I held on too. Because 2 years is 2 years. Because she had been good to me even if the leaving was hard. Because the story we'd had was real, even if the sequel wasn't going to happen. Take care of yourself, I said. You too, she said. You really do look. You look like yourself. I know, I said. She got in her car. I watched her pull out of the lot. And then I walked to my own car and sat in it for a minute. The city was doing its thing around me. And I wasn't sad. I wasn't cold either. Just full. Like something had been completed. Not fixed. Not restored. Completed. There's a difference, and it matters. Here's what I've spent a lot of time thinking about since all of this happened. We talk about finding yourself like it's a destination. Like there's a specific coordinate somewhere on a map, and once you locate it, you're done. You know who you are. You've arrived. You can plant a flag and stay there. But I don't think that's how it actually works. I think finding yourself is really about stripping away the noise long enough to actually hear what you want. And the noise can be anything. A job that doesn't fit. A habit you inherited from someone else. A version of yourself you put on for other people so long it started to feel real. A fear that's disguised itself as a preference. Or, and this is the part nobody talks about openly, a relationship you've been hiding inside. Not a bad relationship. Not a toxic one. Just one where the comfort of the arrangement has become a substitute for the more difficult, more honest work of knowing yourself. I wasn't hiding inside what we had. I genuinely loved her. But I had stopped building myself while I was busy building us. She left to find herself. What she didn't realize was that she was also giving me back the conditions I needed to find something I hadn't known I'd lost. She found the door. I walked through it. And the strange thing is, if you asked me right now whether I was grateful for that Tuesday night, I would tell you yes. Not right away. Not while I was eating takeout on a bare floor. Not during the 9 p.m. hours. But now, from here, looking back at the shape of everything, yes. Genuinely and without performance, yes. Because loss, when you don't let it become a story you tell about how badly you were treated, has a way of becoming the most useful thing that ever happened to you. It clears the room. It gives you back the square footage you'd been subletting to someone else. And if you use that space well, if you actually build something in it instead of just leaving it empty and waiting, you end up somewhere you couldn't have reached any other way. That's the whole story, really. Petra came back to town about a month after the coffee shop. We went for a walk along the waterfront, then dinner, then sat on a bench watching the city lights reflected on the water and talking until midnight without either of us noticing the time. She asked me about the relationship. Not intrusively. Not with the competitive edge that some people bring to that question when they're new and want to map the terrain. Just the way someone asks when they want to understand the whole person, not just the current available version of them. I told her the short version. She listened. Then she said, "It sounds like you were the last one to realize you'd already healed." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "The night she left," she said. "You think you were calm because you were suppressing it. But I think you were calm because some part of you already knew the ending was right, even if the timing was painful." I sat with that. "You thanked her," she said. Not out loud, not to her face, but somewhere in how you talk about it. There's gratitude there. "Is that strange?" I asked. She shook her head. "No," she said. "It's rare." We sat there for a while after that. Not talking, just watching the city. And I thought about that flickering light in the kitchen. About how I'd always meant to fix it and never did. About how that small, tolerated, accepted annoyance had been its own quiet metaphor for a dozen other things. A thing that isn't quite working that you accept as just a feature of the room. You stop seeing it. You stop noticing it flicker. And then one day you're in a different room and you realize the light is steady. And you understand, for the first time, what steady actually feels like. I ran into Nadia's friend Deb at a bookstore about 2 months after the coffee shop. Deb had been a constant presence during the relationship. Good person, honest in a way that could sometimes feel like a punch, but was never unfair. She saw me from across the aisle, and her eyebrows went up. "You look genuinely great," she said. "I don't say that casually." "Thank you," I said. She studied me for a second the way someone does when they're deciding whether to say the next thing. "She talks about you," she said. I waited. She said something that stuck with me. Deb said. She said, "I left to find myself and came back to find him." She let that sit in the air between us. "I'm not saying it as an accusation," she said quickly. "I just thought you should know it meant something." I nodded. "How is she?" I asked. "Better," Deb said. "Actually, genuinely better than she was 2 months ago. Starting to figure some things out." "Good," I said. "I genuinely mean that." Deb smiled at me. "I know you do," she said. "That's kind of the whole thing, isn't it? That you actually mean it." Cole asked me one evening over beers, one of those long, slow evenings where the conversation migrates from nothing to everything without anyone directing it. He asked, "Do you ever regret not taking her back?" "No," I said. "Not even a little. I miss who we were at the beginning sometimes," I said. "The first 6 months of it. But that's not the same as regretting what I did at the end." He nodded slowly. "Do you think she'll be okay?" he asked. "I think she already is," I said. "I think she just needed to go through the thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you realized that what you were running toward was behind you the whole time," I said. "And then you figure out what to do with that information." Cole stared at his beer. "That's both insightful and kind of devastating," he said. "Yeah," I said. "That's usually how it goes." He looked at me then. "You're not the same person you were a year ago," he said. "I hope not," I said. "I mean it as a compliment." "I know," I said. "I'm taking it as one." The contract came through in full around week 14. I signed it on a Friday afternoon, sent the paperwork back, got a one-line confirmation email, and then sat at my desk for a few minutes doing nothing except existing in the particular stillness of a thing being done. Then I went back to the studio, made coffee, stood at the window while it brewed. The city was doing its thing outside. Traffic and pigeons, and a woman walking a dog that was clearly walking her. A kid on a bike wobbling down the sidewalk with the uncertain confidence of someone who has not yet fallen enough times to fear falling. An old man on a bench doing nothing that looked like everything. I looked at all of it, and I felt that specific feeling. The one Nadia had seen in me at Sunday windows and tried to find somewhere alone. Just content. Not performing contentment. Not reporting on it. Not needing anyone to confirm it. Just a man in a room that fit, making coffee, watching a city live its life, belonging entirely and without complication to himself. The last thing she said to me in that parking lot, just before she got in her car and drove away, she said, "I didn't expect you to be okay." And I told her I hadn't expected it either. What I didn't say, because it was too much for a parking lot on a Thursday afternoon, was that okay was underselling it by a significant margin. I wasn't just okay. I was somewhere I had never been before. Not because she left. Not because loss transformed me in some cinematic way with a clean arc and a lesson at the end. But because when she left, I made a choice. 1,000 small choices, actually, stacked one on top of the other over 12 weeks. To run instead of stall. To build instead of brood. To hold the door open and genuinely mean it. To let the story end cleanly without turning it into a wound I'd carry for years. To let myself be alone long enough to remember what I actually wanted. I didn't do it to win anything. I didn't do it to be the protagonist of a better story. I did it because the version of me that sat across from her at that kitchen table, the one who made the pasta and chose the wine and always remembered everything. He deserved better than to collapse when the thing he'd invested himself in walked out the door. He deserved to find out what he was actually made of when nobody was watching. Turns out, he was made of quite a bit. He just hadn't been given the room to find out until she gave it to him. She texted me once more, about a month after the coffee shop. Just, "I hope you know I'm rooting for you." I looked at it for a long time. No games. No subtext. No strategy running underneath it. Just her, being honest, from a distance. I wrote back, "I know. I'm rooting for you too." And I meant it. That's the whole thing. Not fireworks. Not a speech. Not a lesson with a bow on it. Just two people who had mattered to each other, finding a way to be honest from opposite sides of something that used to be shared. That, I think, is what it looks like when something ends without bitterness. Not perfect. Not painless. Just, I'm rooting for you. I know. And then the quiet that comes after, which, it turns out, is a very good place to start.